we sort of call the code red moment internally.
That's Mike Knoop, co-founder and head of AI at Zapier. He's led the product team that helps over 10 million people automate workflows between 5,000 of your favorite applications. Many consider Zapier to be the backbone of modern automation. In early 2022, Mike gave up his exec title to go all in on AI at Zapier, not just for product's sake, but to figure out how to enable Zapier's internal employees with AI. I wanted to talk with Mike because he thinks about how to enable his employees with AI in ways that other business leaders don't.
Got in front of the whole org and just said, yeah, we're going to give everybody 1 week to go like step out of your day job and figure out how to use language models for yourself.
In this episode, we talk about Zapier's top internal use cases for AI that actually increase revenue, Mike's recommendations for how other businesses should get started with internal AI, and his predictions on the future skill sets of knowledge workers and where Zapier will be making headcount investments to meet the AI wave. So Mike, as I was researching for the interview, one thing that stood out to me was how you've embraced different roles at Zapier. It seems like you filled in different gaps depending on what the business needed. And last July, you and your co-founder, Brian, both gave up your exec title and went all in on Zapier AI at Zapier. What does that mean? What's that transition been like?
Well, a personal story there, plus the AI story. I think there's two different ones. On the personal side, I think I've actually met quite a few sort of third co-founders, which is how I sort of got into Zapier. From the very early days, it was always very clear from the very beginning that I think Wade was going to be CEO, Brian was going to be CTO. And so what does a third co-founder do exactly? I had an engineering background. I dropped out of engineering school to start Zapier. But it was always clear Brian was like a stronger engineer out of the gate than I was. And so that sort of in the early days left over whatever they aren't focused on is what I'm going to do. And I tried to hold that kind of mindset throughout the entire history of Zapier. So, at the beginning of Zapier, I was doing a lot of front-end building, a lot of product design that turned into UX research, data analysis, that turned into a product management job. And all along the way, was never the best at any of those individual jobs and would try to hire people. My job became basically prove out the role at Zapier, figure out what it should do, and then go hire somebody better than me and basically fire myself from the role. So I joke that I've fired myself from jobs at Zapier 4 or 5 times now. And the biggest one was I was the president of our products organization. So I had all of our engineering and products reporting up to me for a few years. Mostly to try and sort of turn us around to introducing new products. The new tables product or interfaces product or transfer product were sort of things that were brought to market that I set out to try and get into market. And more recently, and then a year ago, I read the Chain of Thought paper. It was actually more than a year ago. It came out last January. And I'd been paying attention to language models for a while, since GPT-2 and 3 era. I did a whole internal presentation, in fact, on GPT-3 when it came out. I thought it was so cool. But didn't find an immediate use case. It was a novelty. I think many people saw GPT-3 as with the sort of online demos and playground. And then I read the Chain of Thought paper last January, which showed that there was this reasoning overhang capability in the models that no one really fully understood. And it had been there since GPT-3 came out. And that to me felt so, one, interesting of a problem, and two, sort of exciting / existential for Zapier. AI and automation are sort of mode collapsing into the same thing. And we needed to know what they could do. And so that was the kind of moment when last summer I was all right, I know I got to go all in on AI at this point. And just the reality of being an exec running, several hundred person organization is you just don't have as much time as you think you want to be able to go hands-on. So that's what led to ultimately me giving up that role and saying, actually, this is the right thing for Zapier. There's no one else in the organization today that sees what I see, I think, and is willing to go do what I'm about to do. So I sort of gave up that role and went all in. And Brian was a little bit of my CTO and co-founder was a little bit better of a position to do it, given he didn't have any direct reports already. So he could kind of spend his time aimed at whatever he wanted to, though he did give up a lot of his exec team focus as well. And for about 6 months, we just iterated through the idea space of what was possible, what types of products were possible to build with language models, what were the capabilities and limits of them. One of the first things I think, anyone who was building with them back last summer or fall realized was they're frozen in time, right? They're these model weights, they're not online, they don't have the ability to use tools. And that was something that Zapier could potentially offer is well, we've got a we've got a toolkit with 50,000 actions in our platform of all of our apps that we integrate with. Could we like expose those to language models? So we worked through the idea space, ultimately led to us launching the ChatGPT plugin back in March as one of the 13 launch partners there. And since then, the main thing that I got asked all about was like, I'd show up to these like AI events and, trying to promote and show off the new capabilities we're bringing to Zapier. And everyone would just ask like me, what, help me cut through the hype. There was such this huge hype cycle at the beginning, end of Q1, beginning of Q2. And folks just, I think, reasonably wanted to know, business leaders, not technical folks, even engineers, like what use cases are you seeing that actually work? What's not working? What are your customers actually using it for? Should I even pay attention to this at this point? Is this another sort of like crypto wave style thing where I can just like ignore it and it'll eventually go away? What's real?
Did you call like a hand raise and say, who wants to come join me on this journey? Or was it very individual?
At the beginning of it, it was very individual. It's just Brian and I. We did have one or two other people that actually somebody who left Zapier to go found a company, we pulled back in. And one other person, I think internally, who was like really interested in just working on AI and LLMs. But that was it. I think remember, this was like pre-ChatGPT. So like most people were like, yeah, what are you, this is a weird thing, Mike. Like, why are you like doing this? Are you sure this is like what we should be spending our time, what you should be spending your time on? Like, I don't think the sort of there wasn't general broad awareness that like this stuff was going to be as important as it was. So after ChatGPT came out, I think it started being like, okay, I get it. Like this does seem important. We should figure this out. But for the first like month or two, I think it was sort of an odd thing for a few folks.
Well, so let's dig into that because that seems interesting. So you go into the AI space, quote, before it was cool. And then all of a sudden ChatGPT comes out. How does your mind shift change? Have you thought about new things, or how does the energy switch?
We had actually built a prototype of like ChatGPT internally. So we actually like, it's sort of interesting. We worked through, like we built a version of ChatGPT before it existed. We built a version of like the tree of thought, the graph of thought stuff now before that sort of was a thing. We built the tool former paper that came out. Like we had a version of that working internally. And that's what sort of led to the plugin. So I think I was actually pretty happy that we'd moved through the broad idea space very quickly. And I think landed on at least the product shape that felt like the best fit initially for us. I don't think we launched that like version of our own ChatGPT if it would have had anywhere near as much sort of impact as what ChatGPT was able to have. But like still, I felt good at least that we had built a version of it and we found the limits of it and we found what it was good at and then focused on the spot that we felt like we could add a lot of differentiated, unique value sort of in this like emerging ecosystem. So I remember like being personally surprised by how much like broad awareness the industry brought to it. Like, I guess like I thought it was like very interesting. It was going to be a big deal. I didn't realize it was going to be like a big deal so quickly. So like, I don't think you can like sit here and I certainly couldn't have say, oh, I had perfect awareness that was coming. But I think there was some zeitgeist stuff that got caught up in that too. But broadly, I think I got surprised in that dimension. But overall, I did think that the like broad space was going to be pretty important given what I was seeing from language models to date.
How pervasive is the AI talk at the leadership level? So when you're having your exec meetings, is it just taking over all the conversation, or is it still kind of business as usual?
I've heard two stories here. Internally, it's like taking over everything. As it should. I think for an automation business, like I mentioned, when I go talk to our customers, Zapier's in this like kind of category of automation, workflow automation. And when I talk to the folks who are using language models and thinking about AI, they think about what it does for them in sort of the same way they think about what Zapier can do them, which is, hey, it's software that like does magical things for me. Basically, those are the folks that sort of get the most out of Zapier, right? Is these folks that sort of go to 0 to 1 with it. It's an enablement technology, not a time-saving technology. And sure, automation absolutely is a use for time saving. However, like for the folks that like love us the most, it's usually folks that otherwise don't have great alternatives. It's like, hey, I don't know how to code. I'm not an engineer. I don't have budget to go hire an engineer. And I wouldn't have been able to do it. Otherwise, I found Zapier, discovered it, and it allowed me to go on this journey where I was able to accomplish the thing for my business, the thing for my team, the thing for myself that otherwise I felt was like out of reach. And I think that's the promise of a lot of these language model systems and AI systems is sort of offers the ability for folks to do things that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to get leverage that they would otherwise feel like it would have been sort of beyond them. So in that sense, that's where I say like I sort of sense this like broad topic of AI and automation are sort of mode collapsing into the same thing. And frankly, AI is winning. Like
Sure.
that is the thing I hear most business users want to talk to me about and are interested in is how is that working? So I think it's like on a escape ramp, and I think that's going to continue. I don't see that reversing. So for us, it's very existential. It's either we're going to figure this stuff out and we're going to 10, 100x our business, or we're not, and other folks are going to catch up and they're going to surpass us. So it felt very existential, and both in a good and a bad way. But obviously, I would like it to be in a good way. So we're going to spend a lot of time on our focus there. As I spent time with other companies, though, outside Zapier, I definitely feel it more uneven in terms of like how much exec attention is on it. I've served at a lot of companies, and one of the first things I ask execs when I meet them is like, do you have a sense of what adoption is like inside your organization? And for the most part, the most common story here is like, well, I hear a lot of interest and I know there's some usage, but I bet it's like 5%, maybe. And I have no way to measure. I have no sense really. Like I have no definitive way to tell you how many people, individuals in my company are getting benefited by language models or this like emergence and explosion of these new AI features and tools. And I think the reality is for a lot of companies still, it's not existential, right? It is something that can accelerate them, something that can help them go faster, close more revenue, drive down costs. But those are sort of like meeting departmental goals, right? It's like in service of something that organization wants to do. And I think that's true for most companies. Like the AI is going to get deployed in service of some other goal. It's not going to be it's not going to be the means itself. Whereas for us, it touches on both like the means, but also the ends for our customers.
I've talked to a bunch of companies as well who are starting AI committees or AI red teams, kind of internal groups who are figuring out how to do internal enablement to their employees. Does Zapier have something like this? And how'd you all think about that?
Yeah, we do actually. I can share so this summer I've been doing a bunch of internal like research in the organization ourselves, just to understand like how much adoption is there, how we're using AI and LLMs internally. This is one chart I can talk over. So this is a graph of basically AI adoption at the individual level. So this is about the y-axis here is the count of employees. The x-axis is the date over the last 12 months. And around March, late March is when we internally, and this was sort of after GPT-4 came out, after our plugin got launched, we sort of called a code red moment internally where we said, look, this stuff, like we'd gone through the exploration phase for 6 months. We realized what was possible. Like we'd proven it to ourselves with the products we were bringing into market. And so we went to the rest of the organization and said, this is going to be important for us. Not only is it important at an individual level, but we're going to need to figure it out so that like we can help our own customers navigate this as well and help them figure out what to use automation for or AI and automation for. So we did this code red moment where Wade, my co-founder, CEO, got in front of the whole org and just said, yeah, we're going to give everybody 1 week to go like step out of your day job and figure out how to use language models for yourself. And now that kicked off a bunch of work, an enablement team on legal, on IT to figure out like, okay, which tools can we unlock for folks? Which versions of the tools should we give folks? What's the guidelines for where, we can bring in customer data and where we can't? So there was a good sprint for a week or, maybe 2-3 weeks where we're figuring all that out. Ultimately, it culminated in this 1 week sort of hackathon that we did in the middle of April, which you can see in this chart in terms of the impact. It's almost like an overnight huge step function increase in the amount of use cases we're adopting. And what you're seeing here is this is a measure of Zaps. So actually use cases of Zapier itself using a language model step somewhere in it or an AI app. But generally the most popular one is like an OpenAI completion step or an embedding lookup step. So something that's like, transformer based or language model enabled. So I have very high confidence in the data because it's literally like measuring the usage of Zapier. We have another maybe 10 or 15 percentage points too that are using things like, ChatGPT for Enterprise that just got launched and announced, other first-party AI tools. Mm-hmm. We have a chatbot builder which uses LLMs under the hood. So there's another few percentage points of folks that aren't represented purely in this graph, but this is the cleanest one to look at, I think, that showcases our sort of compressed adoption timeline internally of using LLMs. And from this, then you can start talking about like, okay, well, what are people, what's driving the use cases there? And I found use cases across pretty much every department: product, sales, marketing, CS, like you name it. And we can talk about each department individually, but I'd say like, if I was giving like any guidance for companies, maybe 2 points of like advice for anyone who's just starting to think about how to use these. One is this: what you should do is think about like all of the hard problems your organization has encountered that you haven't been able to solve yet. Maybe like ones you've tried to solve, but were intractable for whatever reason. What was it? Too expensive? Tire contractors couldn't get like an engineering grip on the problem itself. I recommend at least revisiting every single one of those problems now with language models in hand, and just see, can we get a new like handle on that problem as a result of having language models. And in our case, we found quite a few cases where we've been able to find pretty significant ROI through that like mindset. Basically just take our hardest problems we never solved and go back. And an example of one of those is error messaging. So like error messages on Zapier, we've known that they're a problem from the very beginning, right? Error messages are written by like developers. And these are like error messages written by our third-party partners, right? Like their developers are building their APIs and they expose, some error message they never thought would see light of day to a non-technical business user. And yet here it is, like sent in an email directly to, like the head of support ops. And they're like, wait, what the heck does this like our, cryptic error message mean? How do I solve this? That is a very, very wide complexity problem on Zapier, given just like how much variability and how many different errors emerge from all the different systems we connect with. We've known that's a problem since 2013. And we tried in the early days to get a handle on it using heuristics, categorization, even manually. We even built like a system that just could manually tag an error message when they came through support, and we'd look for similar ones and show those. And it just like never got good enough. The sort of complexity grew, the problem complexity grew faster than we could get like our hands around the problem. So we sort of gave up on it, frankly, for, I don't know, 8 years. And that is a problem we've revisited with language models. Because one of the things we're really good at is dealing with like high complexity problems, unstructured problem space, text space, which is like exactly what we have with error messages. And now we can do a much better job of doing similarity difference, and cosine similarity to look for messages, tag them, categorize them. We're even doing like experiments to generate resolution steps. So like even just say, hey, given this error message, just why don't you like suggest the user, like what's 1, 2, 3 that they should do to fix it? And that's starting to work. So that's an example of a problem where like you should go back to them, just retest your assumption that that's an unsolvable problem. That's my first advice. And then the second one is, I think like the fat head of our long tail of use cases for LMs internally is around like feature extraction over raw text, usually customer data. So think like, you've got sales calls where you're getting transcripts, maybe 10, 20 transcripts a day with thousands of, words a piece. You've got, maybe a couple hundred issue tickets on Zendesk coming in every single day. That's unstructured data. Maybe your product teams are running feature surveys where they're sending out type forms or Google Forms and collecting raw feedback from customers. Or maybe you have an inbound like help support desk where you get product feedback that's like getting triaged in. All of those places are like high volume, unstructured data where it's very hard to extract out a sense of like trends, patterns, themes, issues. And that's something language models are really, really good at. So we point like language models at all those unstructured sources and look for patterns now, pull out summary, pull out features of them. Like, example for in the support case would be, hey, let's generate a report of like, what are the top new support issues that we're seeing over the last 48 hours, put a velocity score against it, and then figure out, okay, and then use another language model to do, make an assessment of which product team owns that issue based on the parts of the code base they own. And it's just using embedding similarity stuff to do it. And it's like pretty good. So we built this like auto triager, which like we get this nice score of tickets, routes it automatically to the right team in Slack. And now they get this like daily report of like when a new issue's trending that like they can fix and resolve. So like those are generally the types of, that's like probably the head of the fat tail of the types of use cases I see internally is just like, you applying language models to reason over large amounts of unstructured text.
Which teams are actually building these different tools? And so your sales tools, your IT tools, et cetera, will it be a common kind of dev team that does internal tools, or does each individual lead take on that responsibility?
At this point, when I was looking at our best use cases, it tends to be individual people. We don't have like one team going around the organization, like trying to help folks do enablement on a team by team basis. We are actually considering doing that. We tried to take a more like democratized approach, given that everyone at Zapier in theory should be the best users of Zapier. We wanted them to at least, let's see if we can get a broad start on the problem by just like asking everybody to take some individual responsibility to go figure out how to use it. And that's paid off. So like if I look down our top list, I was actually just looking at some of the profiles of folks. So we've got like, Chris, our partner operations specialist, or Reed, who's one of our AI product managers, or Diane, who's one of our ops specialists and PMs. Like those tend to be the folks that have like figured out how to build these things. That they tend to be in those operational roles where they're looking across some sort of workflow that matters to a department, or have some good sense of like what the departmental goals are that matter that they can deploy LMs against.
And you had brought up enabling customers, kind of like doing common sense training with the do's and don'ts of LLMs and what they're good at and what they're not good
Yeah.
at. It sounds like y'all don't have that right now, but you see it as something that you may want to do in the future.
Like a list of what's good and bad.
Well, kind of, one way is to say, oh, let's democratize the approach and let's have our employees figure out what to do with language
Yeah.
models. Another way is to say, hey, we're going to do some formal training and say, this is what they're good at, this is what they aren't good at, to try to spur up more ideas for them.
We are starting to do that. We've got a series on our blog that we just started where we're starting to pull out our own internal use cases and showcase them and like
Nice.
talk about them. So the one I was talking about internally with like support is going to get like a big spotlight and a feature mention. I mean, if I just like riff, like I think summarization is something they're really, really good at. Generally, if I'm kind of like talking with potential customer, thinking about how I use LLMs, you generally want to deploy at least prototype in a way where you're going to have a human in the loop somewhere. Generally the technology, like reliability is one of the big problems. Hallucination reliability is one of the two big issues you're going to encounter. And it's best usually to start on use cases that allow humans to still sort of be in the loop.
Yeah, absolutely. And earlier you talked about you found workflows that give you the ROI that you're looking for. What is that return? Is it more efficiency? Is it less time on task? Or how do you measure that?
I think it varies by department and like what the use case is. Like the Zap template one, would be, I would look at it through the lens of like labor enhancement, right? We're able to literally 100x
Yeah.
the rate of high quality landing pages that we're able to publish. So that's like a cost saving. That's a labor enhancement. We're getting more leverage out of the employees and the money that we put into that sort of system today. For other ones in our sales organization, where we've got a couple of use cases where we're doing similar sales call transcriptions to automatically doing summarization and feature extraction over sales calls into HubSpot. So there's like, you have like really high quality data synchronization between sales conversations and HubSpot. So there's like zero rep or admin overhead you have to do. We're probably booking somewhere around, 100K of ARR a month as a result of that. So that's like literally like top line revenue that we're booking,
Yeah.
because we have better insight into all of the deals. So when our sales managers are going in to look at our, when they're prospecting essentially against our sales funding to figure out, okay, today, who am I going to spend time with? They want to spend time with the leads that are most likely to close. They want, those are the people that we want to get across the finish line. So these types of tools are like really, really helpful to like increase awareness and attention on the deals that are most likely, and that translates into sort of revenue. So you can do that. I think there's we're starting to adopt it in our CS org as well around doing issue and ticket summarization, drafting replies. We have an internal chatbot with Q&A. It's like grounded on our product knowledge base that our CS agents use to do their own Q&A against that bot in order to get higher quality answers. This is things that lead to decreased ticket time, increased quality of the response too. So it actually takes less reps, like less replies to get the like customer to a happy outcome. So that's like customer satisfaction, CSAT, like support costs as well. So it's varied across the entire board here from top line to bottom line.
Yeah, that's very cool. And as you're saying those use cases, you're just making me think that the blog, when you share them all, will be invaluable to folks because that is tangible, good ROI that they can implement within their orgs. And I'm sure it'll be a good acquisition funnel for Zapier too, because I'm assuming you probably need Zapier to do a lot of these workflows.
All the ones I've talked about, yes. I mean, I think it's really about just like, more broadly though, if you just step back, I have heard folks just ask like, is it hype or is it like something I can ignore? And I feel, having spent the summer looking at actual useful use cases internally, I can say pretty confidently that there is something very real here. And I don't even think we've hit the limits of, like, I think we should be going further actually, even though I found some good use cases. Like, I think we're maybe, I don't know, a fifth of like how much we could be using it for internally. That's why I mentioned before, like, we are considering spinning up actually an enablement team to go even further internally. But yeah, there's something real here.
Well, I was going to say, so what does going further look like? You mentioned the enablement team. What else is there?
I think the reality is that it's too hard still. And I'll reflect this on Zapier as a product, though I think broadly it's true too. It's still too hard to discover actually useful use cases and then get them set up and working. ChatGPT, like when I survey like business users around AI, the there's very, very broad awareness. This is actually backed up by some market studies too. There's very broad awareness of what like AI and ChatGPT are amongst knowledge workers. Actual usage and adoption is very, very low. You're talking like 1 to 2 percentage points. So there's this huge like gap between awareness and adoption right now with the technology. And you kind of dig into that, and it's often, well, I haven't really played with it much. I didn't know what to exactly use it for. So maybe I did kind of type in a couple messages, but I didn't like, get hooked on any use case that I could like build into my internal workflow. So like, yeah, I tried it once, but I haven't gone back to it and tried it again. Or I actually did have a use case, but the technology failed for me in some way, right? Like, ChatGPT was able to do the generation part, but I really needed to do some like, my use case required this like classification thing and to be piped into an ongoing workflow rather than me having to go to this like synchronous, chat experience in order to get the value out of it. So like the product didn't quite fit the use case that they had in mind. So I think broadly, like there's high awareness, but low actual adoption. And that's true even in Zapier. I showed that curve earlier. The Zap curve, it's capped out. It's an S curve. It's leveling out at a third of the company adopting all language models in internal workflow automation. And I would like to see that above 50%, above 75%. How do we get there?
Sure.
And that's where that's why I think Zapier is still too hard for a lot of folks. Like Zapier itself is I think we've made strides on making like programming, which is effectively what Zapier does under the hood, easier over the last 10 years. But I still think it's too hard for most non-technical line of business employees. We have more work to do there to make it like easy enough to be adopted by wall to wall inside of an organization. And this is where I think language models actually offer a chance to do that. I've not seen a technology come out that I thought could go back and solve that problem. We talk about like problems that have been around since the beginning. That is a problem that's been around since the beginning of Zapier. It's always been a little hard. Like in relative to the alternatives, it's easy, like coding or some other product. But compared to just like not doing anything, it's actually pretty challenging. There's a big activation energy. There's a big learning curve you have to go through to learn how to build with Zapier. And I think language models offer an escape hatch on that S curve where, hey, we actually could use natural language to help users both discover what they should use language models to automate, as well as build it, set it up, where they don't have to be able to. They don't have to be this like, somebody who's thinking about all the details and ways that it can fail. They just have to have a really good problem in mind, and the technology can meet them where they're at to help them like go from problem to actually something working.
Yeah, that makes sense, because in order to set up an automation, you're right, there are a lot of details you need to figure out, and traditionally a human needs to define those details. But if you can have a language model help you fill in some of those blanks based off of your objective or your goal, you could take some of those away and vastly simplify the process.
That's dope. We're building that right now. We've just deployed a Zap guesser on our onboarding process. Is kind of the first thing of many that we're hoping to release along this kind of direction, where being able to have a natural language based discussion with a user to do the end-to-end like life cycle management of workflow.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I know Zapier has a philosophy of don't hire till it hurts. Do you see any early signals on that with regards to AI and where you may need to hire to help?
That was a philosophy actually that we held in the very early days of Zapier. We moved away from it a little bit in the scaling phase of Zapier. The thing that we learned about it was it might be a decent like philosophy still, but you start to learn and be able to predict your pain. Maybe is a better way to think about it. Shoot, I better start like hiring in this area. Otherwise I'm going to be behind the 8 ball. Like an example of this that I remember was when we launched multi-step Zaps in 2016, we had that philosophy in place. And so we didn't ramp our like support investment ahead of time. And overnight, the complexity of the product skyrocketed, right? We went from 2 steps to any number of arbitrary steps you want. And just the amount of edge cases that introduced it, it was like 3 or 4x the amount of support tickets we started getting because the product was buggy and new and we had to fix that. And like, we hadn't trained our team on how to do it. And it was just like, oh yeah, but that was probably in a place we we should be able to predict our pain and, think ahead of things. So I'll make that one like asterisk on that philosophy.
Sure.
But like maybe like your question was kind of getting more at this core of like, are there areas where we're starting to like think, oh, we could go further if we hired folks specifically in AI? Is that kind of the thrust of the question?
That's exactly it. So instead of just making an effort investment or maybe a monetary investment, well, now we're starting to think about these headcount investments in these certain areas.
Most orgs I've talked to bring language models in through their engineering org. Kind of interesting, interesting pattern. I think engineering product organizations generally are just like the first ones to pick up the tech because it's more accessible to them, right? There's new concepts they have to learn. There's good, rich APIs that you can just adopt off the shelf. So they start prototyping and playing with it. And then that knowledge starts like kind of spreading out in the organization to some of the design leaders, to the marketing leaders, into the sales and support org. And that's how I've seen it like kind of proliferate. And at this point, we're starting, or I should say, I've sort of seen a trend where I've started to think about this like kind of new category of engineer, like AI engineer, as a type of person that we actually are like looking to hire and would like to hire more of. I've hired a few folks this summer that have been spending the last 6-8 months just entirely engrossed in language model technology and understanding how to apply the technology, what techniques work, which don't. Almost as like a sort of third kind of like stool on the back-end engineer, front-end engineer, AI engineer, because it really is a completely different skill set. So I'd say that's like one big thing we've been hiring for that's like AI specific. But I don't know, I think my long-term take is that like for sort of non-technical employees, for knowledge workers, in 10 years, this is just going to be an assumed skill set. Like, how to use language model based tools. And maybe it's not a job requirement, but all of the senior people in all of their fields are going to know how to use these tools. It's probably like not dissimilar from the Office suite, right? Excel, document processor. Yeah, you could be a knowledge worker with not really be proficient in those things, but like the folks that are going to get ahead. And I sort of think that in the base case, that's what we see happen with language models. So that's one of the reasons we offered to the whole company a week off their day job to go figure out how to use the tech. Because we knew like, look, in 10 years, this is going to be really important for your job, no matter who you are. So here's like 1 week right now at the very beginning to get onto the ground floor and go figure it out for yourself. And, take the individual initiative to go figure it out, because it is going to be an important part of every future job at Zapier and beyond.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And Mike, I just want to wrap it up with one last kind of fun question here. So there's a ton of AI news out there, right? There's stuff all over Twitter, stuff all over the headlines. What's the news that gets you excited? What are you looking forward to seeing when it's coming out?
Model architecture innovation is when I'm like not spending time on useful AI use cases. That's those are the papers I'm reading and like most interested in. There's this like question of what can you predict about language models and AI at this point? And I think the things you can have pretty strong degree of conviction around today are that latency is going to go down for token generation for LLMs. Cost is going to go down as a result of that. That's going to unlock some new use cases that language models can do right now. They're just expensive and slow, such as these like deep chains of thought style use cases. You'll be able to package those up more and more into synchronous product experiences, where today they kind of have to run offline, or you have to make product UX trade-offs. The thing that I would not feel comfortable like putting a date on or a smooth trend line around is capability enhancements. That is something that comes more in step function chunks than it does along like smooth curves.
Sure.
I think over a long enough arc, if you zoom out on a step function graph, it's going to look like a smooth curve. But when you zoom in on a year by year basis, who knows exactly when we'll see that next sort of hit. And that's going to be down, that like sort of capability step function is going to be downstream of new model architecture, is what I believe. And so that's what I'm excited about, is seeing those types of papers get published and pushing on that. I think it's kind of not in vogue right now, given everyone's like really just trying to figure out how do we like extract as much value as we can out of the sort of architecture we did find with transformers. But personally, that's where I get excited.